So, I am leaving Tirana onwards and upwards from Tirana International Airport. It's actually named after Mother Teresa, I discovered on landing. She was actually born in what is now North Macedonia, but her family had Albanian heritage. She was denied entry to Albania by the communist government for decades, but returned again in 1991, following the collapse of communism. I walked through a square named after her. One of the days on my stay, we might fly over it on our way south towards Athens. So, let's go. There we go, Sylvia. Up we go. And then a gentle right turn south over the city. Which is just over there. Let's lower those revs. There we go. All set fair, Sylvia. And there is Tirana up ahead. It's been the capital since 1920, a few years after Albania announced its independence from the Ottoman Empire, and after other more powerful countries around the world said, yes, Albania, you can be a country. Although the borders were disputed for a while, and a lot of Albanians found themselves living in a different country to the one they thought they were living in, as lines were drawn. Over there is Mount Dashti. That's it. Just over there in the east. I was told by the young woman at the front desk of the hotel I ended up in that it was a must-go location. Amazing views of the city and beyond. She had a beautiful way of describing it. The city unfolds beneath you, she said. Go just before sunset. The whole city glows. I wasn't gonna go. I'm sometimes a bit weird about being told I must do something. And of course, I didn't like to say to her that I get views from above all the time. But every day she asked me, have you done it? Have you been up? So I eventually did it. And it did actually give me a good chance to escape for a few hours. You can get a cable car up to the top of it, but I was feeling twitchy all week, and once you're in a cable car, there's no way out, no control, no way to improvise if something feels wrong. You're in a box, on a wire, being delivered somewhere, and who knows what is waiting at the other end. or who you're sharing the ride with. So I walked. It was pretty tough, actually. I'm not as fit as I used to be. And I didn't have any water with me either. Me and Izzy were always very good at making sure the kids always had water when we went out, but I'm rubbish at making myself drink it. We never had water bottles when I was at school. No hydration breaks. The receptionist was right, though. It was worth it. And the city did unfold as you walked up and looked back down on it. And there was a cafe at the top, so I was able to get some water. I stayed till just before sunset, walked down as the sun went down, past overgrown, nature-reclaimed concrete bunkers dotted around the hillside, like a 20th century Motte Bailey, eyes on the world, paranoia about invasion from all sides. It's easy to be paranoid. The bigger airport helped the landing, but the accompanying protocols and more officious air worried me even more than it had in Zadar. I'd already decided back then not to declare the rings that Paula gave me to return to her husband. They, like me, were just transiting on the way to Athens. I'd already been rattled by the border guard. He'd taken an inordinately long time looking through my passport, reading old visas, rotating it to view entry and exit stamps. Why has he been to all these places? He was thinking. At least that's what I thought he was thinking. Why would he be there and then there and then there and then nowhere for months? He would occasionally pause at a particular page and look up at me. Which visa was that, I wondered. Maybe he was wondering why a couple of stamps seemed to coincide with major world events. Good job he didn't see my passport from the mid-90s. I tried to neither look blank or to smile, which is a difficult look to pull off. I probably ended up looking like I was competing in the World Gurning Championships. Eventually he turned back to the photo page, looked at me, said, "We have the same birthday." No smile. Passed me the passport back. I thought I might get some preferential treatment. I was arriving as a pilot after all, but no. There I was, walking through customs with all the passengers from all the tourist flights, attempting to look cool and calm, attempting to look relaxed, and not like someone pretending to be relaxed. Okay, where have those mountains gone? Okay, that's good. That is better. I could feel the eyes of disdainful customs officials follow me down the green lane, but I didn't look around and I didn't speed up. I'm not sure how I would have coped if I actually was smuggling something through. This is why I wish I hadn't accepted this mission to carry these rings. Even I was starting to think I was dodgy. Anyway, I got through, and in the arrivals hall I paused to grab an espresso, a jolt to see me into the city centre. As I looked around, I made eye contact with a thin man with a beleaguered moustache. He was standing across the hall by some payphones. Nice retro feature, I thought. Payphones. They're all defibrillators back home now. although the combination of the espresso and my anxiety was making me think I might actually need a defibrillator, which was made even more likely when a couple of minutes later I caught Moustache Man's eyes again. He glanced away immediately, and when I looked back a moment later, he was gone. I had intended to get a taxi into town to speed the evening up, but now I wasn't so sure I liked the idea. I had an uneasy feeling. A feeling that I wanted to stay in full public view, so I set off in search of the bus stand. There was a big queue. That was good. I was able to merge with the others. I didn't have to wait long. The bus arrived, and within 40 minutes we were in Skanderbeg Square. It reminded me a bit of Tiananmen Square. Huge open space. Place that feels like the centre of the country, a place that all roads lead to, and where all national institutions gather. The National Opera, the Ballet Theatre, the National Library, Natural History Museum, National Bank, government departments, mosque, the Tirana International Hotel. Classic look, like many other communist-era hotels I've stayed in various European countries over the years. A blunt block of concrete and glass. Apparently there are secret escape tunnels leading from the basements under the hotel, quick exits for government officials if threats ever came in. I was going to book into a hostel, but with the rings in their envelope and my worry about being followed, I wanted somewhere more private, more secure, so I found a hotel near the square, cheaper than the International and less prominent, although maybe without escape tunnels. I didn't ask, and they didn't offer them up as an extra. Sauna, gym, escape tunnels, sir. I couldn't work out if it was safer to have the rings on me or hide them in the room. My luggage was meagre, the room was Spartan, so hiding places were at a premium. My guess was that a professional room searcher would know more about hiding places than I would as an amateur concealer. It was then that I had a brainwave. I pulled the straight-back chair from the dressing table, put it under the pendant light. Standing on the chair, I was just able to reach the light fitting. Teaspoon acted as a flat-headed screwdriver, and the two rings fit neatly into the fitting without shorting anything out. Stepping down, I felt smug. Whoever finds these rings deserves them, I thought, until I considered the possibility that a concealed camera, perhaps behind the mirror, may have been watching my whole performance. I searched as well as I could without tearing off the wallpaper, but I could see no sign of a camera. I figured if they've gone as far as concealing cameras in my room, then even if I take the rings with me, they are likely to just stop me, take the rings from me directly. I don't know why I thought there'd be cameras in my room. Maybe I've read and watched too many Cold War thrillers. Although this is a city with a museum of surveillance dedicated to the work of the Sigurimi, the Albanian intelligence service and secret police. Like the Stasi, people's daily lives monitored, where you could be informed on by colleagues, neighbours, friends, even family. I remember talking to a guy in Berlin a few years after the wall came down. He'd lived in the East and was saying you ended up behaving like you were being watched, even if you couldn't tell that you were. Anyway, I left the rings and went out looking for food and drink. I was desperate to eat and desperately tired. I wanted something hearty and comforting, and if it was big enough to be designed to be shared, then I'd happily eat it all on my own. For you, sir, that is too much. I'll be the judge of that. I stepped out of the hotel to be met by some noisy protests. Not about me. I ducked down a side street. I found an expat bar, its entrance flanked by a pair of old-style red phone boxes. I admired the effort of shipping those things out to Tirana, but I didn't want to see myself as an expat. I was homesick, but sick for my home, not this bar's version of England. It reminded me of the English pub in Rakvere, Estonia. I'd asked for a recommendation from the locals when we were working there. They all suggested the English bar. I explained I prefer an Estonian bar, but they in turn explained that there were 2 bars in town. They drank in the English bar, so if I wanted to go to the Estonia bar, that was fine, but they would not be joining me. When they got to their English bar, I recognised its authenticity immediately. Evidently the landlord had bought the same off-the-shelf traditional English pub decor kit that hotel chains buy when they're building a new place. And they wanted to feel that it's not just been knocked up. It was a totally authentic fake English pub. Wood panelling, brewery mirrors, dartboard, even cigarette-stained paint colour. Not sure what you'd call that. Ash white, Benson and Hedges beige, tar taupe. As it was, we all had a very nice time, just as we would have done in an authentic traditional English pub, or probably as we would have done in the Estonian bar. I didn't go in the telephone box place. I went into the Hemingway bar. It was lively. Jazz music was playing. Lots of decorative items everywhere, suitcases, mirrors. Lots of people not protesting but laughing and nodding and swaying. On a table in the corner was a small manual typewriter with a picture of Ernest Hemingway propped on the rollers. Sense here was, if Ernest Hemingway were in Tirana, this is where he'd choose to drink and write. Mostly drink. Because it's a great bar, and if Ernest Hemingway thought it was a great bar, then it would be a great bar, because Ernest Hemingway knew a lot about bars from first-hand experience, particularly bars in potentially dangerous places. I found a stall at the far end, and ignoring the myriad varieties of rum available, I ordered a beer. They didn't serve food, but I found that often a good drink on an empty stomach guarantees sleep. I did sleep that night, but not much on the others. It's been hot, and it hasn't been cooling down much at night, so I'm still tired. But now is not the time to sleep. These mountains look tricky. Not very human-friendly. They suddenly loomed up as we left the city. Apparently there are bears down there, so even if you survive a crash, you could get eaten by a bear. I can never remember what you're supposed to do if you do meet a bear. Are you supposed to wave your arms around and shout at it, or stay calm and quiet, make eye contact and face it down? Or look away meekly? Are you supposed to leg it or amble calmly away? Anyway, our altitude is looking good. Let's hope we don't have to test out these competing theories for real. We're flying over the route of the ancient Via Egnatia, another Roman highway which connected this region with what is now Istanbul. About 700 miles. It crossed Albania, North Macedonia, Greece and Turkey. Those Romans knew a thing or two about roads, though they did get some tips from Mother Nature. Some of it follows the Shkumbin River down there. It starts near the border with North Macedonia, flows west into the Adriatic. The river has done a good job of finding its natural way through the mountains, and so roads and railways have followed its course east to west. Down there is Lake Ohrid, one of those borders, the border between Albania and North Macedonia, runs right through the middle of it. Invisible from up here, and I suspect if you're on the water down there, unless they've laid out a line of buoys to demarcate it, but can't see any. No little floating passport control. They shared the lake between the two countries when they set up the borders. Water is probably the same on either side. It's been here for 1,000,000 years, so it will see borders come and go, settlements rise and fall. The church of St. John at Caneo is on the shore down there, named after John of Patmos, who, it is said, wrote the book of Revelation. War, famine, death, 7 angels, 7 bowls, a 7-headed dragon, a bottomless pit, lakes of burning fire, plagues and storm, the evil punished until we get a new world. No more suffering and death. Too late for many of us, though. According to my map, this is the border now. Yeah. No line of buoys, no passport control. When I was working in Skopje early in the noughties, the country was officially called the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Turns out the northern region of Greece is called Macedonia, so things were quite confusing and acrimonious. A guy who was driving kit to us via Greece kept seeing signs with Macedonia on, but couldn't work out why, when he knew he still had hours of driving to do. Whenever he stopped to ask people for directions to Macedonia, they said, "You're already here." He thought they were playing mind games on him. The Second Gulf War broke out while we were there. Embassy passed on recommendations from the Foreign Office in London that we keep a low profile and employ an armed guard. This was the official line, but in fact FYR Macedonia were early, if unarmed, members of the coalition helping out the Americans and the British. Though I suppose just because your government was doing that, that didn't mean the people of FYR Macedonia would agree, so they must have thought we might be a target. When I asked why a country still with UN peacekeeping forces on its own land was joining a military coalition in the Gulf, I was told they were joining in name alone and not committing resources. They were mostly currying favour with the big powers, hoping for some payback when it came to the name argument. Lakes are a good way to locate yourself from the air. They usually stay the same shape. Their outline looks the way it does on a map, and they don't change much. Forests shape shift as they are felled and replanted. Towns grow and spread, roads wander, but lakes are more consistent, and they announce themselves, particularly on a beautiful afternoon like today. A patch of shimmering light in the landscape. Find the lake, confirm its shape, then look for the road, the river, or the town beside it, and the rest of the map quietly falls into place. Yeah, I'm surprised how mountainous it is around here. They do loom large, so you do have to concentrate. I think Sylvia's okay though. Everything looks good. Let's keep going. Keep going. Keep going. And there we go. Another lake to orientate ourselves. Another patch of shimmering blue amongst the peaks. A compromise was reached in the end on the naming of FYR Macedonia. It was agreed that it would become North Macedonia. This is geographically accurate and certainly easier typographically on road signs. And it's not unprecedented. There's North and South Korea, Sudan and South Sudan. The agreement with Greece brokered by the United Nations was called the Prespa Agreement, after the twin lakes we're flying over now. The larger Great Lake contains the point where Albania, North Macedonia and Greece all meet. Again, no flags, no passport control. The smaller lake to the south is almost entirely in Greece. We may fly over the tail and the point where the Albanian and Greek border crosses the lake. Yeah, here we go. I think that tripartite border is just beneath us, near that little island down there. Let's go and have a closer look. The treaty was signed in Saradis, village just down here on the coast of the bigger of the two lakes. The water from these lakes seeps down through underground geology to feed Lake Ohrid, all part of the internal water cycle. People have lived on these shores for thousands of years. There are tiny chapels hollowed out of the rocks, hermits' caves dotted all along the shore. Suppose I'm a bit of a hermit up here in Sylvia. I'm sure I could do it down there. Although I do like the idea of no incoming signals, no more bad news, but I think the walls might amplify my already pounding thoughts, bounce them around in the dark. I don't know what I'd scratch into the walls. Stick drawings of the family, maybe, like the kids used to bring home from school. There's a natural barrier down there. I don't think it's man-made. I think it's just sediment and rock. Probably changes as the water rises and falls. At some point, Alexander III of Macedonia transitioned into being Alexander the Great. Nice name if you can live up to it. He was born in Pella, which is squarely in the modern Greek region of Macedonia. You could see why you wouldn't want an entirely different country laying claim to this iconic figure. In the course of the night in the Hemingway bar back in Tirana, I grew pretty pally with the older male bartender. He had some English, and during the occasional lull in the service he'd come over to the end of the bar, clean glasses and have a talk. He explained that the protests I'd seen earlier were against the government. They were protesting against poor services and accusing officials of corruption. Protesters claim their government are cozying up to international oligarchs. Today was just one of many days of protests. The government had recently waived environmental restrictions in order to allow the Trump family to invest in a vast luxury holiday resort on Albania's only island. He said all Albanians love this island. It's uninhabited. There are colonies of flamingos under threat, which explains why I saw so many inflatable flamingos on the protest. Later, the barman explained that their Prime Minister, Tirana, is at the centre of the protesters' ire. He said it was a shame because back when he was mayor of Tirana, Rama was very popular. He had played basketball for Albania and was a professional artist. In his time as mayor, he encouraged the introduction of colour into what had been a famously drab city, and you can see it as you walk around. He also focused effort on restoring public spaces to build a sense of community cohesion. Thousands of like-minded people gathering daily to call for his resignation probably wasn't the kind of community cohesion that he was hoping for. Before his time as mayor, Rama had been Minister for Culture, Youth and Sport. He became leader of the Socialist Opposition Party and finally, in 2013, Prime Minister, post he's held ever since. "You know him," the barman said, whipping out his phone. "He's the giant guy." Sure enough, a few seconds later I was looking at an agency photo on his phone of a huge smiling man in a suit with close cropped grey hair and stubbly beard. He was walking beside the French President Macron, making him look like a glove puppet. Flamingo's legs are weird, but not in the way that I'd originally imagined. I'd always thought that their knees were weird because they flex forward, not in the conventional backward way. But in fact, their knees are higher up under their feathers. They flex in their perfectly conventional backward direction. The joint we see, assuming that it's the flamingo's knee, is actually their ankle, and the whole species are on tiptoe the entire time. Apparently they're so well designed they can balance on one leg without using any muscular effort. They're pink because of their diet. They start off grey, like the ugly duckling, but for the flamingo, you are what you eat holds very true. The more healthy they are, the brighter the pink. I don't know if this is where the phrase "in the pink" comes from. I'm certainly not feeling in the pink at the moment. Can food turn us a different colour? I know if you eat too much asparagus, it can turn you wee green, and I've had a couple of alarming moments after eating beetroot. I don't even like beetroot, so the brief moment of terror and anxiety I encountered on the toilet after eating it has made me like it even less. Late on, when the bar was finally thinning out, the barman placed a shot glass in front of me. Though the place clearly specialised in rums, this was a creamy white lion's milk, he said. Who knew lion's milk tastes of aniseed? I ordered a second and the barman waved away payment. Sleep goods, he said. Thank you. I will. I hope. On my way out, sitting on the left by the door, I saw the moustache guy from the airport. He was talking with another guy a bit younger in an old school tracksuit. Moustache guy didn't look up, but tracksuit guy did, and seemed to give me a look of recognition. From that moment I knew I wasn't destined to sleep good in Tirana. The coincidence felt too much, the pairing too unlikely. They looked so cliched, they must be genuinely following me. It felt like surveillance. Maybe I wasn't just conjuring up these thoughts from movies and books. Maybe it was real. I enjoy watching this stuff. I like reading this stuff. I don't like being the subject of this stuff. I needed to work out my next move to get out of Albania. Look at that. Down there. Man-made scars. Lignite mines. Lignite is brown coal. It's pretty low down on the pecking order of coal, the league table of coal. It's formed quite quickly, well, in geological terms. It doesn't give off as much energy as other coal. It's near the surface, hence these open cast mines. They built whole towns down there to get it out, and then power stations to burn it to generate electricity. It's pretty cheap to get out and easy to burn, but terrible for the environment, both on the ground down there and in the air up here. But it keeps the lights on, and it's fueled industry for places with few other resources. When I got back to the room, I opened the door cautiously, just in case there was someone in there. Of course, there wasn't. But when I flicked on the light, I did get a jolt of adrenaline. Someone had been in there. It was obvious. The clothes I'd left on the floor had been folded and put on top of my suitcase. The bed had been turned down. It was a level of service you might expect in some establishments, but it didn't seem right for this one. It seemed strange. It seemed clever, though why trash someone's room in your search if you can make it look neater than when you first went in there and conceal your objective? Make it look all part of the service. I think the chair was where I left it, but I couldn't swear to it. There weren't any marks on the hard floor beneath the fitting. I thought there was nothing to be gained from checking now and a risk from checking, but I guess that even dog-tired I wouldn't be able to sleep with the uncertainty. So I checked. The rings were undisturbed, and I collapsed into bed. Coming up just over the ridge is Lake Polyphytos. It's one of Greece's largest artificial lakes, created by damming the Aliakmon River in the 70s, providing hydroelectric power generation, replacing some of those dirty brown coal lignite power stations that we've just flown over. I do always find it hard to tell the difference between a natural lake and a man-made lake. I suppose it's because water will always make a natural shape unless you build it into a concrete box. There it is, just through the clouds. Generates electricity and provides a natural place for both humans and wildlife to enjoy. Zeus's daughters, the Muses, lived round here. There were 9 Muses altogether, each allocated a different portfolio of responsibility. It was a sign of the times that different forms of poetry were divided between the 4 of them. There was epic, elegiac, lyric, choral, and light verse. Meanwhile, it seems you'd be without a muse if you were into film, photography, sculpture, painting, or pottery. I suppose it was possible that there was a typo in the job descriptions and Calliope was in fact the muse for epic pottery. Not sure if you can describe the people you know as muses. Maybe your kids. Maybe they're your muses. They do change the way you think about the world. They make you see it through different eyes. They give you a reason to do things. They make things matter in a way that perhaps they didn't matter before. The only muse I'm really familiar with is Terpsichore. This is only because Izzy had a book kicking around called Terpsichore in Sneakers. She's a fan of postmodern dance, and as with passive smoking, I've become a bit of a connoisseur of postmodern dance myself, without ever deliberately intending to. We've been to see a lot over the years, some brilliant, some baffling, some bafflingly brilliant. I've even been to shows without her when I've been away for work. I've found comfort being in a theatre in the dark, imagining Izzy by my side. I think as well I understand being in a theatre watching dance. It's a bit like going to a gallery or a museum. Wherever you are in the world, you understand the rules, you understand the situation. And with dance, there's no language barrier. Look at that bridge. That is the Servia High Bridge. 1,372 meters long. Pretty spectacular. Anyway, I am getting distracted by major infrastructure projects. Need to stay on course, stay on track for Athens if I'm going to get there before the sun goes down. So yeah, Izzy got me into contemporary dance. I like that feeling of sitting back in the dark, kind of letting it flow over me. I can make up my own mind about what I'm seeing. As well as covering light verse, Muse Talia covers comedy. The only Talia I knew runs a plus-size crumpet stall at festivals with her mum. They're a Greek family, which makes sense more for the name than the crumpets, which I think are traditionally English. I think as well as being plus-size, Talia's crumpets come with a range of fillings, not just butter. Talia is the muse of butter and crumpets. There is a version of the Muse story in which they've undergone a radical downsizing and had their roles radically reimagined. In this version, there are just 3 muses. One takes song, another takes occasion, the last one takes memory. I think I like the idea that everything is either song, occasion, or memory. I think this is memory. Mythic memory. Mythos. This is a legendary place and it looks the part. Tricky flying too. Feels like the gods could tempt you to your death. Hide a mountain top behind some cloud before it's too late. You are bouncing around on a mountainside. We are heading towards Mount Olympus. Feels wrong to be flying over Mount Olympus. Somewhere as mythic as Olympus should surely really only be seen from below. I think I feel the same way about the North Pole. I mean, given the amount of effort explorers have taken to get themselves there over the years, it seems wrong to now just be able to see it as you glance out the window of a jumbo jet, sipping a beer and watching a film. I did actually get to see it from below about 20 years ago now. I'd sent colleagues out to Thessaloniki to work on a project. They drove a load of kit out in the back of an old 7.5 ton truck we had. Thought this was a better bet than flying it out. We wanted to stay with it, make sure it arrived safe, be able to explain what it was en route. They got out there okay, worked with locals on the install. They were out there for a couple of months, in which time Gaz had fallen in love with one of the local team. Decided he was going to stay with her in Greece. So I had to fly out and drive the truck back with Jay. The winding, narrow roads through the mountains were pretty terrible. It was April, I think, but there was still snow on the peaks. Our truck really wasn't built for mountain driving. Every bend needed a change of gear. The roads were crumbling away at the edges, or had bits of the mountain side from above crumbling down and resting in the middle. Didn't seem to be any barriers to stop you careering off. It was both exciting and terrifying, with occasional glimpses of a beautiful new straight road being built in the valleys below. Anyway, we made it to the port to catch the ferry to Italy. The police were a bit confused about why we were travelling with an empty truck, which was made more difficult to explain because Gaz had all the paperwork back in Thessaloniki. In the end, they just thought we were idiots and let us on. I love that truck. And there is Mount Olympus. Nowadays you could call yourself an Olympian if you've competed in the Olympic Games. I can't think of any sport for which this isn't an extraordinary achievement. I mean, even if you're knocked out in the first heats, you're only in the heats because you're amazing in the first place. When I saw professional athletes bouncing around on a running track for the first time, I was astonished. They looked like a group of gazelles. They sprang around as if they belonged to a different species. Half my weight with 3 times the power. To be an Olympian now, you have to be incredibly disciplined and talented. I don't think I've got either of those traits, probably. To qualify as an Olympian in ancient Greece, you just had to be a god. I don't have that quality either. Now, we treat sports people like gods. We revere them, we worship them, especially when they score a goal or save a penalty, and they release a huge amount of collective tension and then collective celebration. The Olympian gods were 2nd and 3rd generation Greek gods who, I suppose, resembled the A-team in a very approximate way. To follow polytheistic religions, you really need a wall chart or a whiteboard to keep on top of things. A bit like a World Cup wall chart or a Tour de France chart. Although, more so than sports, there's a violent, steamy soap opera dimension to the Greek gods, which makes it very tough to follow. Although, actually we do get that in sport as well. It's generally agreed that there are 12 true Olympian gods. Some are more famous than others. There's Hera, the god of marriage, women and the family. So consequently, not at all famous, probably the most important. Demeter is the god of agriculture and harvest, so again, very important, but again, not very famous. Aphrodite, by contrast, has a very strong brand recognition, all tied up in sex, fertility, desire, and so on. Also brought the concept of the aphrodisiac to the market, which was certainly a great financial breakthrough and helpful to makers of potions, balms, and perfumes. There's Poseidon. I'd always assumed Poseidon lived underwater, but I think that's chiefly because of the Poseidon Adventure, that 70s disaster movie starring Gene Hackman in which the cruise ship flips over. In fact, or rather in myth, Poseidon ruled over the sea, storms, earthquakes and horses, all from the top of Mount Olympus. Quite a varied portfolio, like a number of government ministries rolled into one: environment, food, rural affairs. Mythos in Greek means traditional tale, like the Poseidon Adventure, I suppose. Ares is the god of war and is also presumably fed up with being mistaken for an astrological goat. He was an Olympian too. Probably wouldn't want to mess with him. Apollo is the god of healing, prophecy, music and the sun. Nice portfolio, health and culture. It was a vision of Apollo riding across the sky on his chariot that inspired Abe Silverstein, manager of NASA, to give his name to the moon program. This was a rare nod to the poetic in what was otherwise a necessarily very pragmatic project. In his book Moon Dust, Andrew Smith interviews Apollo astronauts who've walked on the moon and reflects that while sending nerveless, ice-cool, implacable test pilots to the lunar surface made absolute operational sense as they were very well equipped to do the flying, their phlegmatic natures made them less than ideal for what actually turned out to be the mission's most important element, which was communicating to everyone back on Earth the awe-inspiring wonder of being up there and recognizing the fragile beauty and fragility of the Earth below. Some people seem to think that you can do away with arts and just rely on science to make progress, but ultimately you need both. Down there, in the distance, is the river Peneus, named after the god Peneus. In Daphne and Apollo, the story begins when Apollo mocks Eros. Eros takes revenge by shooting Apollo with a golden arrow that makes him fall helplessly in love with Daphne. Then he strikes Daphne with a lead arrow that makes her reject love altogether. Apollo pursues her relentlessly until, exhausted and terrified, she calls on her father Peneus, the river god, to save her. Peneus does what any good father would do and transforms her into a laurel tree. Just as Apollo gets to her. Unable to possess her, Apollo declares the laurel sacred, and its leaves became his symbol, later woven into the victory wreaths awarded to poets and Olympians. Artemis was Apollo's twin sister, and she provides the name for NASA's current lunar program. I'm not sure if there are any plans to send any poets up with her. I suspect not. I wandered lonely as an astronaut. Hephaestus must perform very poorly in focus groups unless they're full of blacksmiths and carpenters. He is the god of blacksmiths and carpenters. Still plenty of carpenters around, but blacksmiths are getting thinner on the ground, so he must be kicking his heels quite a bit. Athena is goddess of wisdom, and in the 1980s ran a very successful chain of high street shops selling posters, calendars and postcards. Hermes, god of heralds and travellers, is famous for his winged sandals. Presumably he licensed the name and image to the parcel delivery firm. In my experience, their service has tended to be less than godlike, although, come to think of it, the Greek gods do tend to be wildly capricious and unreliable, so maybe the name is fitting and it's all lined up fine. Of course, also Hermes handbags, which are very expensive. I didn't get Izzy one of those. I don't think she'd have liked it anyway. I don't think the handbags and the delivery firm are two branches of the same company, though there is a certain synergy, I suppose, between currying and bags, so maybe they are. Hermes is also god of merchants and thieves, which must put him in an ethically invidious position when dealing with shoplifters. Of course, Zeus was an Olympian too, which I think is 11. Number 12 is either Hestia, virgin goddess of hearth and home, or Dionysus, who is essentially god of mad, drunken partying. So I suppose who you choose depends on what kind of Olympus mountaintop experience you are after. The Olympic movement is very heavy about policing its trademark on the games. We had some suppliers around the 2012 games in London who suffered Olympic wiring, got slapped with a writ. They argued that no one could believe that they were profiting off the name of the games. I don't think it came to anything in the end. Down there is Larissa. We're over the Thessaly region. Lots of agriculture. I expect they make feta cheese down there somewhere. Made from sheep's milk or a mix of goat's milk and sheep's milk. There's probably some down there nibbling on the grass somewhere. A bit too high up to see them. Very good in a salad, feta cheese. Probably the best cheese to have in a salad, although grilled halloumi is good too. I don't think you'd chunk up cheddar to put in a salad. You'd chunk it up to combine with pineapple to make a hedgehog, but not in a salad. Although, probably did have that when I was a kid. And today you call that a ploughman's lunch, I suppose. You'd imagine the ploughman's lunch was eaten regularly by ploughmen in the 19th century, early 20th, but it was probably invented or at least pushed by the British Cheese Board in the 50s and 60s to boost sales of British cheese. Not sure you could get feta then. My mum's dad was a ploughman with Shire horses. He died before I met him, so I don't know what he had for lunch. I do know he plays the squeeze box and smoked a pipe. I'd always assumed that the parabolic mirror which concentrates the sun rays to light the Olympic torch was at the top of Mount Olympus, but no, it's in Olympia, which is nowhere near the mountain. It's on the Peloponnese Peninsula. The Peloponnese Peninsula is both the start of a promising tongue twister and the big blob of land that makes up the southwestern corner of mainland Greece, where much of the best Greek history is set. That's high acclaim in a country with a lot of history. The sacred flame was a feature of the ancient games. It was stolen from Prometheus, which seems like a punchy move. It was only introduced to the modern games on its 9th edition. The idea of Jan Wils, the architect who designed the stadium in Amsterdam. He had included an elegant tower to accommodate the flame, and that was intended to indicate to the people across the city that the games were on. The idea was clearly popular because it's persisted ever since. His design won him the gold medal for architecture at that same Olympics. Between 1912 and 1948 there were medals awarded in architecture, literature, music, painting and sculpture. This practice ended not because judging art like sport is ludicrous, still got figure skating, but because the winners were professional artists, and at the time the Olympics was a strictly amateur undertaking. O sport, delight of the gods, distillation of life, in the grey dingle of modern existence, restless with barren toil, you suddenly appeared like the shining messenger of vanished ages, those ages when humanity could smile. Baron de Coubertin, who co-founded the Games, won its first ever gold medal for literature in the 1912 Games. He entered his poem under a pseudonym, but nevertheless it must have been a difficult job for him to persuade everyone that him winning the medal wasn't just a massive stitch-up. Presidents wielding power over prize-giving. Coubertin was inspired to form the International Olympic Committee after he visited Much Wenlock in Shropshire in 1890, not far from where I grew up. He'd been invited there to see the Wenlock Olympics by their founder, the local doctor, William Penny Brooks. Brooks believed in the importance and power of personal fitness and organised sport. First Wenlock Games were held in 1850, with a range of events open to all comers. Crowds assembled on a hill overlooking a field where the games took place, a natural grandstand. Events included athletics, penny farthing, bike races, football, quoits and cricket. There was even a wheelbarrow race. I was excellent at that at primary school. I was the wheelbarrow. I was light with fast hands. I never got to compete at Olympic level though. I suppose maybe it could make an appearance as a demonstration sport, but I'm probably too old to compete now. Time to let the younger generation have a go. Maybe I could be a coach. Not only were the Wenlock Games designed to improve physical fitness, but like those early modern Olympics, they were also designed to encourage creativity. So there were prizes for poetry, painting, handwriting, music. My dad could have won the handwriting prize. Secondary school in Wenlock is named after William Brooks, and this year is the 140th edition of the games. I bought Sarah the Wenlock 2012 Olympic mascot. She would have been 3. It was soft and cuddly, but she was terrified of it. Its face was just one giant eye, like a cyclops. The most famous cyclops is Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon. In Homer's Odyssey, Polyphemus traps Odysseus and 12 of his companions inside his cave. He eats quite a few of them before Odysseus manages to come up with a cunning plan. He tells the Cyclops that his name is Nobody, gets the Cyclops drunk, and blinds him with a sharpened olive stake while he sleeps. When Polyphemus cries out that nobody has harmed him, the other Cyclops ignore his shouts, and so Odysseus and what is left of his crew escape. Byron would probably have won the Poetry Medal. He was big in Greece, still is for some. A revolutionary hero. In 1823, when he was living in Genoa, he was invited to Greece to support the Greek War of Independence as they tried to break free from the Ottoman Empire. First, he only had a vague idea of how they thought he could help. After reaching the Greek island of Kefalonia, he found himself courted by rival Greek factions before travelling on to Missolonghi. There he spent a large part of his own fortune equipping troops, refitting ships, buying supplies, and trying to unite feuding Greek leaders. He had hoped to launch an attack himself against the Ottomans, but political infighting and delays prevented it, and before he could see action he fell ill. Doctors thought bloodletting would help, but actually, strangely, it made things worse, and he died in April 1824. There's a statue of him in the Garden of Heroes in Missolonghi. His heart was reportedly buried there, separately from his body, which was returned to England. Suede used Byron's line, "She walked in beauty like the night," in their song Heroine. Me and Izzy played that album a lot when it first came out. No offence to Brett Anderson, but I think I prefer Byron's words when I think of Izzy. She walks in beauty like the night, of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. Izzy's wrong to blame herself for the fire. And what were the chances of the mirror being at precisely the wrong angle, of the sun being so strong with so little cloud for so long, of the curtains being so flammable, and of us not being around? What were those chances? If she knew the risks and ignored them, then maybe, yeah, I could be angry, but I didn't spot the danger either, so I'm as culpable as her. She was right to be furious about the insurance. That was different. That was my responsibility, and something that fell between the cracks. Being busy isn't an excuse. Well, it is an excuse, but it's not an acceptable excuse. What was I more busy with? What was more urgent than protecting our home? They said, call if you think there's going to be anyone who's going to answer you. Which of the saints are you going to turn to? They would say, wrath kills the foolish, envy and destruction end in resentment. They've seen the foolish have their homes destroyed around them, their children lost. They've been crushed in court and found no one to save them. They've seen the rich have their possessions taken away, everything they've earned stolen from under their noses and dispersed, squandered, consumed by others. They said, affliction doesn't come forth from dust, neither does trouble spring out of the ground, yet man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upwards. They said he'd ask God for help, he'd put it all before God, God who does great things and unsearchable, marvellous things without number, who gives rain upon the earth and sends waters upon the fields, who sets up on high those that have been low and causes those who mourn to be lifted by victory, who disappoints the devices of the crafty so that their hands cannot perform their enterprises, who traps the cunning in their own craftiness and throws the plans of schemers headlong into confusion, so they meet with darkness in the daytime and grope in the noonday as in the night, who saves the weak from the grip of the strong so they can hope again. They said, happy is the man whom God corrects. Don't reject this punishment from the Almighty, for what is made sore is bound up, and the hands that wound will make whole. They said, if God delivers you 6 troubles, you will be saved. The most famous of Athena's posters is a photograph of Fiona Butler wearing a borrowed tennis dress, her dad's trainers and no pants. The photographer, her boyfriend Martin Elliott, was studying photography in Birmingham. The tennis court was a university court in Edgbaston. He sold the image to Athena but kept the copyright, which was a good idea, because it sold 2 million copies. I think my brother had one on his bedroom wall, or maybe on the inside of his wardrobe door, hoping that Mum wouldn't see it. I'm not sure if Butler counts as Eliot's muse. I used to think of a muse as the person painters like painting, often in the nude, but that role seems too passive. Someone who can provoke ideas and discussions would seem like a better muse to me. Electricians require amusing more than they require a muse. Izzy, maybe my muse. She did amuse me, and she was good at ethics, a very clear sense of right and wrong. Less nuanced than mine. If I needed my thinking firmed up, I'd turn to her before making a decision. She also helped me see other things from other people's perspectives. Another useful blessing. Susie Solidor was a popular singer in Paris, where she owned her own club, La Vie Parisienne. Edith Little Bird Piaf sang there, as did Marlene Dietrich. Susie was the star. Her repertoire was often explicit, including lesbian anthems and songs usually performed by men about seducing women, which she performed in her husky voice. With a short blonde bob and wearing striking, often androgynous clothing, she had an acute sense of the power and value of her own image. She was once described as the most painted woman in the world. Artists queued up to paint her in order to burnish their own reputations. She kept the portraits hung around the club. You'd recognise the one by Tamara de Lempicka, the Polish artist whose bold, colourful work is regularly used on covers of books about Art Deco. We've just flown over Volos, the city from which Jason set off to find the Golden Fleece. He would have been down below us now. In the story, Jason is sent on an impossible quest to recover a sacred golden ram's fleece from the distant land of Colchis. The fleece had originally belonged, of course, to a magical ram that rescued two royal children, and after its sacrifice it was placed in a grove guarded by a never-sleeping dragon. This wasn't going to be an easy quest, so Jason gathered a crew of heroes called the Argonaut and sailed to retrieve it. He sailed on a boat called the Argo. Argo means swift, and the boat was built by Argus, one of the Argonauts. The king of Colchis sets him deadly tasks and trials, yoking fire-breathing bulls and fighting warriors born from dragons' teeth. With the help of Medea, the king's daughter, who uses her magic to aid him, Jason completes the trials, puts the dragon to sleep, and steals the fleece, escaping home with it after a dangerous journey. John Kerry was the captain of a swift boat in Vietnam. He was injured by shrapnel on 2 separate occasions, won 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star and a Bronze Star. Years later, this valour in combat gave him a political advantage when running for president against George Bush, who had spent his war in the Texas Air National Guard approximately 9,000 miles from Vietnam. This advantage lasted until a group calling themselves Swift Boat Veterans for Truth launched a series of baseless slurs against Kerry's war record, claiming to reveal the truth whilst actually lying. Now this tactic is known by the shorthand Swift Boating. Young men are sent to fight old men's wars. I've only ever known one Jason. He was a school acquaintance. I wouldn't flatter myself to say he was a friend. He ran in a slightly different crowd than me. He'd always wanted to be in the army. Growing up they called him Tank, mostly because of his tendency to accidentally break things, I think. But when he left school at 16 he joined up. I stayed on to do A-levels. He had to persuade his mum to sign the papers which allowed him to enter active service before he reached the age of 18. When I was 18, I went off to Hull to study electronic engineering. In the summer holidays after my first year, Jason was on the front page of all the papers. Blown to Bits was the headline, with an image of a wire frame of a coach charred black. I went to the funeral. It was at the big Catholic church down by the station. Full military honours, obviously packed. Strange to think I've lived nearly 40 years longer than him. I wonder what he might have done in 40 years. His poor mum. The mythological Jason's mum pretended that he was stillborn in order to prevent his uncle killing him. The Greek gods did have especially dysfunctional families. This is the Pagasetic Gulf below us, where Jason would have sailed on his boat. Jason was a hero. He earned his spurs. Spurs originated in ancient Greece and probably ancient Rome. Early versions were simple, pointed metal prongs attached to sandals or boots. They were designed to direct the movement of the horse, not designed to punish it. The round wheel ones you often see on cowboy films came later, in the Middle Ages. Some people have bone spurs, bony lumps that grow on bones in the spine or around joints. They form when a joint has been damaged by arthritis. They don't always cause problems, but if they rub against bone or muscles, they can affect your movement or put pressure on nerves. Main symptoms are pain or stiffness. They can include pins and needles, numbness. Treatment might include painkillers like paracetamol, physiotherapy, or losing weight. I'd have been a pioneer of fashion. I'm at the blunt training edge of sartorial innovation. First time I heard the word fleece used to refer to an item of clothing, I thought it was a joke. An in-joke of my friend Claire with her housemates when referring to a sweater, then pretending to be Neanderthal cave dwellers or something. I was still reading from the fact of a whole new classification of clothing had been invented and was in mainstream shops without my knowing when a science teacher friend mentioned they'd been standing beside a bonfire, sparks had landed on her fleece and melted tiny patches of it. She was annoyed but also pleased that she could use this as evidence for her class of students that, far from being an animal skin, her fleece was in fact made of polyester, plastic. Poly, many, and ester kind of molecule. Don't know where Claire is now. Back up north probably, unless the big smoke dragged her in. Birmingham's origin story is that it was a Saxon settlement, then market site on the banks of the River Ray. By contrast, Thebes, which is up ahead on the other side of this shoreline, was formed when Cadmus was sent by his parents to rescue his sister Europa from the clutches of Zeus. Following advice from the Delphic oracle, he gave up this mission in order to follow a cow marked with a half-moon design on its flank and formed a city where it decided to lie down. Once the cow eventually becomes exhausted and lies down, Cadmus decides to sacrifice it to Athena, sends two friends to fetch water for the occasion. Unfortunately, they are killed by a dragon who has been guarding the well. Cadmus gets revenge on the dragon by killing it, and Athena tells Cadmus to sow the dragon's teeth in the ground. From these teeth grow a crop of fierce, armed, fighting men. Cadmus set all these men fighting each other until just 5 are left standing. These lucky 5 are the men who built Thebes. Birmingham's famous sons include Jasper Carrot and Ozzy Osbourne. Thebes has Oedipus and Hercules. Thebes was surrounded by a huge wall with 7 gates. Birmingham has the middle ring road. On the upside, Birmingham was never sacked by Alexander the Great, just by constant redevelopment. It'll be nice when it's finished. St. Luke the Evangelist died in Thebes. After writing his Gospel and the Acts of the Apostles, his final act was to be martyred, hung from an olive tree. His body was transferred to Constantinople in the year 357, and as is the gruesome way of these things, his head ended up in Prague, while the rest of his body was sent to Padua. We flew over that a couple of weeks ago. 1992, Thebes asked for Luke's body to be returned, but Padua wasn't so keen. In the end, they reached a compromise solution in which Thebes was thrown a bone, a rib, to be more precise. To be even more precise, the rib that lay closest to Luke's heart. Sure, it's what St. Luke would have wanted. Philistines are regularly accused of undervaluing art, but they lived on the southern coast of Canaan during the Iron Age, so their access to galleries was probably pretty limited. They've been lording it over the children of Israel, which confusingly means all the people of Israel, not just the children. Anyway, the children of Israel have been lorded over by the Philistines for 40 years as a result of having done evil in the sight of the Lord. Things had got so bad at one point that the Philistines had captured the Ark of the Covenant, the search for which was the central plot device of the film Raiders of the Lost Ark, clues in the title. In the book of Samuel, the Philistines return the Ark because it's bringing them a massive amount of bad luck. Samson is born to be the hero and champion of the children of Israel. He's famously strong, and as a result of a deal made between God and his parents that his hair would never be cut. I think I had a deal with Luke like that for a while. Anyway, there are a lot of troubles that end with Samson killing 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass. Later there's more trouble as Samson meets Delilah, a prostitute made famous by Tom Jones, not to be confused with Divine Brown, a prostitute made famous by Hugh Grant. Delilah is put under pressure by the Philistines to betray the secret of Samson's strength. After a biblical amount of back and forth in which she asks him, he lies to her, she tells them the lies, they act on the incorrect information, and Samson escapes. Eventually he tells her it's all about the hair. He falls asleep on her lap. She cuts off his hair. They grab him, blind him, and bind him. In captivity, the hair starts to grow back. He prays to God for the return of his strength. His wish is granted, and he pulls down the pillars of the building he's being held in, causing his own death and that of many Philistines. Thus far, the Philistines seem to have been more against Samson than art. At the end of the 17th century, a violent row broke out between the townspeople of Jena and local university students. This led the local priest to call the townspeople Philisters. 180 years later, Matthew Arnold, who I last thought about whilst we were flying over Oxford, popularised the English term Philistine to refer to anti-intellectualism that prioritises material gain over all other considerations. I don't like the term Philistine. Only works for me when it's used by Tony Hancock for comic effect. There's a promotional photo of him pulling down 2 Doric columns held by Sid James and Bill Kerr. A clear reference to the fictional Hancock believing himself to be Samson surrounded by Philistines. Hancock was from Birmingham. There's a very flat 2D sculpture of him on a traffic island in Bull Street. I'm sure it's what he would have wanted. Band of Brothers is a spin-off from the film Saving Private Ryan. The plot of Saving Private Ryan is that a mother, Mrs. Ryan, has all her 4 sons on active service in Europe during the Second World War. 3 are killed, and to ensure that the surviving one, James Francis Ryan, played by Matt Damon, continues to survive, a detachment of soldiers led by Tom Hanks is sent through huge danger to bring him home. The Sacred Band of Thebes was an elite fighting unit comprising 150 pairs of male lovers, which preceded President Obama repealing the US military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell legislation by 2,400 years. The rationale was that the men's extreme devotion to each other would make them an irrepressible fighting force. This did work well until they came up against the army of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is an example of a young man leading other young men into war. He was 33 when he cried salt tears that there were no more worlds to conquer. According to darts commentator Sid Waddell, who also noted that Eric Bristow had just won the World Championship, aged 27. Some people say I look a bit like Matt Damon. I'll take that. He's a good actor. Famously good looking. Probably that's not me. He's got a good range. He takes on challenging projects, so do I. People say he's a nice bloke. I don't know if people say that about me, though. My Jason was a Jason with a Y. There's not a Y in the Greek alphabet. Well, there is, but it's called upsilon and makes an oo sound. Having said that, there's not a J in the Greek alphabet at all, so I have no idea how Jason got to be called Jason. The unmarked coach he was in was taking a route normally off limits for an army coach due to its vulnerability to ambushes. The driver said he was following diversion signs. After this, the army stopped using coaches and introduced helicopters. These were the troubles. What a great euphemism for a horror show. Why would people be watching me? Arrive on my own in an old private plane. Is that enough? If it is, why not just ask me some questions? There's nothing against me in England. I'm not fleeing criminal justice. It can't be Interpol catching up with me. It's got to be these rings. There was nothing in Paris, just the absence of Nikki and my cash cards being swallowed. Zurich, the deposit box was empty, but that's just between me and Nikki. In Bologna, I agreed to take those rings for Paula. Nothing happened to me in Zadar, not even sleep, so it's got to be the rings. And if it's not a customs and excise issue, which I really don't think it is, then maybe they aren't Paula's rings. Maybe they're stolen. In which case the person I'm delivering them to isn't her ex-husband having them returned. He could be part of a gang or a fence. A jeweller will break up the engagement ring for its constituent parts. I mean, they don't look that valuable, but what do I know? Maybe there's some history to them. Maybe they were owned by someone famous. Paula, a jewel thief, really? I suppose she could be. I don't know her. I only met her for a few hours in a crowd. And just because she's Leo's partner, and I know Leo, I can't believe he's a jewel thief, but her, I mean, I don't know. She seemed nice. Maybe jewel thieves are nice. I think I've ever met one before. I mean, they're not going to introduce themselves, are they? Hello, I'm a jewel thief, pleased to meet you. Got any jewellery? Returning your wedding and engagement ring to your ex-husband via a courier, your partner's old boss who's lost his mind and is flying aimlessly across Europe. That's a spontaneous act, isn't it? I mean, it's too random to be part of a criminal plot, surely. Unless Nicky is part of it too and he's got word to Leo in Bologna, but I don't think they even know each other that well. I mean, they worked together briefly with me. I mean, our world can be a small world. Maybe they do know each other without me in the middle. Acting as a courier is an easy way to get into trouble on someone else's behalf, I seem to remember thinking. So why did I agree to this? Even if I'm just overthinking, it's taking up a lot of head space. Although I suppose if I wasn't worrying about the rings, I'd find something else to worry about, like, am I using the right oil in Sylvia? Am I going to get shot down? Am I disturbing people out for a quiet walk? Am I distracting drivers and going to be the cause of a major accident? Am I upsetting the sheep? Am I abandoning everything, abandoning Izzy and responsibility for no purpose? I'm tired. I'm going to find somewhere to land. Somewhere on the edge of the city. Let's lose some height. I'm looking for Tatoy Airport, just north of the city. Not too far to get in to get these rings delivered. It's at the foot of Mount Parnitha, I think. Mountain covered with Aleppo pine. Forest was badly damaged by forest fires in 2007's. Planes flew over it, dropping thousands of litres of water to try to stop the spread. There are fortresses in various places on the mountain, good lookout spots. And in proper James Bond style, there's a casino on the top, reachable by cable car again. Not sure I'm going to try that one out either. Doesn't sound like the kind of place you go unnoticed. Although maybe it's the perfect place. I haven't got that much experience of casinos, but the ones I have been in usually have quite an eclectic customer base. Some hard gamblers, first-timers, high rollers, people who seem to be there for reasons other than gambling and entertainment. I was given a bundle of cash at the hotel in Skopje, part of that trip, and we were told to keep a low profile. Part of helping us to keep a low profile was encouraging us to go down to the casino in the basement. Lots of shiny suits, glamorous women sitting on the knees of men with lots of jewellery. Thought for a while maybe it was just a setup. They'd created this cliche version of a casino from films just to try and convince us, but then as soon as they left, they went back to being actors or hotel staff like the Truman Show. But I soon realised it was real when we were joking around, not really knowing what we were doing. That didn't go down too well. Luckily the sign on the door said no guns, so at least we didn't get shot. Down there is Tatoi Forest, part of a huge former royal estate. Prince Philip's father's buried in the royal cemetery there. Philip's family were banished from Greece in 1922 after a military government takeover. The British government sent the warship HMS Calypso to evacuate the family. Baby Prince Philip was carried on board in an orange box. A box for oranges, though may well have been orange in colour too. It was badly damaged by fires and earthquakes, but apparently it's on the mend now. So I'm looking for Tatoi Airport. Going back to my more inconspicuous, smaller airfields. The last two places set me on edge a bit. Too many eyes on, too many checks, too many potential questions. Then I just have to decide what I'm going to do about these rings. The easiest thing is to take them to the address as agreed. Assume this is Paula's ex-husband's, put them through the door and then run. Job done. Hoping the police don't stop me on the way there or on the way back. I could take them to Bologna, hand them in at customs, give them to the police. I could hide them in the plane and deal with all of this some other time. I could pretend I've lost them. Trouble is, I've agreed to it, and I find it really hard to go back on an agreement. I say yes to things, and then I realise I've made my life massively more complicated or difficult. Not just my life, the lives of those around me. I just need to get Sylvia down, get into Athens, get rid of these rings and move on. Thanks for joining us, everyone, on our flight down to Athens. Don't forget there's a new 2-hour show every week as we follow Reggie on his journey around the world as he tries to work out what has happened to him and what he's going to do next. Next week's flight from Athens, we'll learn a little bit more about those rings and whether he managed to find Paula's ex-husband to deliver them. Thank you again for joining us. You can catch up on all the other episodes on the Stands Caf YouTube channel. Stay cool and hope to see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.